Studio Ghibli, you know, the people who make you cry over forests and floating houses. Today we are not obsessing over one particular film, but instead digging into the directors, and specifically how their art styles have contributed to Studio Ghibli over the years. I definitely think that style makes a director who they are. You often hear the phrase style over substance, which has kind of become a bit of a slur in the film community, because very often style is substance. Style doesn't just speak about visuals, but in fact every component which goes into making films and art, and I found Studio Ghibli's art and story become a singular entity. From Miyazaki's epic sweeps to Yonabayashi's tiny details, this isn't just animation, it's their diaries on celluloid. And as a filmmaker, I'm always obsessed with the why and how their style mirrors their personal lives, because every good director takes from what they know. Growing up during World War II, Miyazaki's family ran Miyazaki Airplane Co., making parts for Zero fighters. He saw the war's toll, air raids, forced evacuations, and his dad's factory work left him conflicted about technology. This birthed his anti-war pro-nature stance, which is demonstrated in his first film, Nausicaä, Valley of the Wind. Studio Ghibli of course kicked off in 1985, and it was born from Nausicaa's success with a $1 million start, and this of course grew to 15 to 20 million by the time of Boy and the Heron, which was of course released in 2023. Art style has always been a key talking point of any anime, whether it be good or not so good. The Boy and the Heron was seen as Miyazaki's swan song, and Studio Ghibli's films have become a time capsule. You can see them evolve over time of course, but even the oldest ones are still incredible. And so fans worldwide and little goblins like me just love to keep dissecting the frames of all these films, because there's always something you can find. Miyazaki's visuals were inspired by many artists, and a prominent one being Kawase Hasui, who was a massive deal in Japan's Shin-Haga movement, which of course are woodblock paintings. He blended traditional woodblock techniques with Western style painting. His work is as timeless as Ghibli itself. Miyazaki's work echoes Hasui's lush forests, serene countrysides, and reverence for nature. A lot of people point to Hasui's ability to mix natural beauty with human experience, which lines up with Miyazaki's eco-themes and anti-industry. It was June 1945 when Okayama City was bombed in a US air raid. Families had to evacuate the city. They witnessed starvation and loss. I mean, these people were terrified. The air was thick with smoke, the sky a bruised red. Amongst the crowds, there was a boy of 9 years old, clutching his sister's hand. The firebombing had come without warning. B-29s roared overhead, dropping incendiaries that turned the city into a furnace. Although this boy and his family survived the attack, he had seen the horrors of warfare, the widespread destruction and death. This boy's name was Isayo Takahata, and like Hayao Miyazaki, Isayo's background became his art, but in a completely different way. They were both raised around the similar times, of post-war Japan, where both saw countrysides get absolutely obliterated by construction, and it's a sad sight, but it was also clearly quite inspiring. Takahata's art style is one of quiet power, and it doesn't scream for attention, but it lingers with you long after the credits roll. Unlike his Studio Ghibli co-founder Hayao Miyazaki, who leans into lush fantasy and fluid movement, Takahata was more experimental, often grounding his films in realism and impressionism. You see it in Grave of the Fireflies, where his animation feels very restrained and somber, and it just makes you want to cry at every single second. And it's almost documentary-like, it's very observational. And then you have the flip side with the Yamadas and the Princess Kaguya, which looks like a watercolor sketchbook brought to life. He wasn't chasing beauty for its own sake, he was chasing truth, emotion, and the small, often overlooked details of daily life. His work doesn't just ask you to watch, it asks you to slow down and really take it in, especially with Grave of the Fireflies, which just hits every single nail, and that's what makes his work so uniquely affecting. Ocean Waves, directed by Tomami Mojisuki under Studio Ghibli, marked a key artistic evolution, and to me it's a really overlooked film. I love it. Its minimalist art style, soft lines and muted colours shifted from the lush landscapes of earlier films like Totoro, and it reflected this budget-conscious, TV-inspired simplicity. Thematically, it introduced realistic teenage emotions and relationships, and it gave us more complex characters than what we were used to seeing. It explored jealousy and growth, and it paved the way for more introspective works like Only Yesterday, and it broadened Ghibli's emotional range. And a lot of people would say Mochizuki inspired the more modern works of Makoto Shinkai. Yoshifumi Kondo's style sits in this beautiful sweet spot between the grounded realism of Takahata and the whimsical fantasy of Miyazaki. What makes Kondo really unique is how he blended this warmth with precision. He was a very meticulous, clever director. His characters feel deeply human, with subtle facial expressions and attention to everyday detail, the cluttered rooms, the way someone leans into a conversation, and the soft pauses between words. Kondo wasn't just animating movement, he was animating emotion, and another director I can recommend you if you like Kondo's work is, of course, Satoshi Kon, who was a master of emotion. They're both incredible. He had the talent of becoming one of Ghibli's leading directors, and Whisper of the Heart was meant to be just the beginning. Tragically, his life was cut short, similarly to Satoshi Kon, who I mentioned. But even with just one film, you can see he left his imprint on Studio Ghibli. You can feel the promise of someone who truly understood how to bring real life to animation. It's time to raise the mood. See, Hiroyuki Marita was a bit of a wild card in the Studio Ghibli lineup. His only directorial debut for Studio Ghibli was, of course, The Cat Returns, and it's this very cheeky, whimsical anomaly in the filmography. It feels lighter, quirkier, and more offbeat compared to the usual Ghibli fare. What makes Marita unique is his background in key animation. He's got a knack for dynamic movement and playful energy, and you can really feel that in the way The Cat Return flows like a surreal daydream. His style leans towards whimsy and spontaneity, and it's less obsessed with realism and more about capturing a sense of fun and unpredictability. It's kind of childlike. It's a really fun film, and I would have wanted to see Marita make more films, either in the studio or just independent work, but it seems to just be a one and done fun film. He just dipped after working on Akira, he was an assistant on Perfect Blue, and then he said, you know what, I made a fun film for Ghibli, I'm gonna do my own thing, and you know what, I kind of respect that. I kind of rate it. He's just living his life, doing his own thing. Okay, Goro Miyazaki. This is someone I've gone in on in the past, but I've left that in the past, and I can appreciate Goro for the things he does bring to the lineup. So yeah, Goro Miyazaki is probably the most scrutinized filmmaker to come out of Studio Ghibli, particularly because he's Hayao Miyazaki's son, of course. So, you know, nepotism in that. Basically, when you have Miyazaki as your dad, it's nearly impossible to shadow under someone who is such a master, but on the other side, it's definitely a privilege to have someone like that to learn from if you want to get into animation. You can't really ask for better than Miyazaki, can you? Unless maybe Wallace and Gromit comes through. What makes Goro different is he didn't come from an animation background at all. He was a landscape architect first, and you can really see that in his work and his films like From Up on Poppy Hill, which is a genuinely good film. It's a great film. And then you got Tales from the Earthsea, which is a less great film. But they're very focused on atmosphere and setting and place, and I think he could be a great environmental artist. Goro's work often leans into introspection and emotional restraint, and he's still finding his voice, especially with his jump into 3D animation with Earwig and the Witch, which was... It wasn't like a horrendous film at all, it was just weird for Ghibli. I like that Miyazaki puts his foot down and says, no, we're not going to include any AI in our studio at all. You know, 3D animation is kind of teetering on like, do we really want to go this way? There is still a quiet ambition in Goro's work, and I've been pretty critical of him in the past, but he's got the spirit. Hirofumi Yonabayashi is seen as the spiritual successor to Ghibli's golden era. He's got that classic Ghibli touch, but with a slightly modern edge. What makes him stand out is his sensitivity to childhood perspectives and emotional nuances, which is a very important thing for Studio Ghibli because their demographic, a large portion of it is children, and so when you have someone like this who kind of knows their audience and can tailor their work to that mindset, it's an underrated skill, very impressive. In films like The Secret World of Arrietty and When Marnie Was There, he brings this delicate, almost melancholic tone that feels incredibly personal. His animation is really clean and graceful and really atmospheric. There's not many imperfections, if any. He's not trying to overwhelm you with spectacle, but instead he draws you in with subtle emotional beats and beautifully observed details. And after Ghibli paused production, Yonabayashi helped co-found Studio Ponok, where he continued that legacy with Mary and the Witch's Flower, and it's like he's the quiet torchbearer of the Ghibli tradition, less flashy, but deeply heartfelt, and it's always focused on the inner lives of his characters. Yonabayashi seems to stick in a particular lane, and I'd quite like to see him break out of it, and he's still a quite young director, so over time I think he will be producing more stuff. He seems very active, so we're going to see where he goes, because he might be the successor to the big man himself, but I'm going to say, if anyone can still hold on to the beauty of Ghibli and the timeless nature of it, Yonabayashi is probably my first pick. You can see Ghibli branch out in more ways than one. The Red Turtle was a collaborative effort, directed by Michael Dudok de Witt. It blended minimalist European art with Ghibli's polished nature themes, and it definitely signalled a shift for Ghibli because international collaboration is just a very standardised thing in film. Themes weave their identities: Miyazaki's love for nature, Takahata's war scars, Kondo's youth nostalgia, Morita's whimsy, Goro's heritage, and Yonabayashi's intimacy. Subtext reflects their lives, and their lives reflect their animation, their art style, the story and message itself. And of course, Joe Hisaichi's score only helps bring everything to life. I had the urge to make this video after I kind of unconsciously ended up recreating a Ghibli style in a little video I shot. Kind of like a little cute home video, walking around our new home, and it's strange because I think subconsciously I've taken in everything I've known from Studio Ghibli films, the framing, and I kind of put that into my own work, which is interesting to think about. And I think it speaks volumes on how Ghibli films and their art resonates, and how the personal style of each director can resonate with you. And with all these components, the story, the messages, the unique art styles from these unique voices, that's what makes Studio Ghibli timeless. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to subscribe and take care.